you speak.
Okay.
You have a tendency to talk with your hands.
I do.
So, ready?
Yep.
Good morning.
You are listening to?
No, it's good morning.
Oh, it's good morning. I'm good. Sorry.
All right, let's
Good
start
morning.
over.
Okay.
Let's start. All right, Bill,
Every
we're
week.
gonna start. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Gordon Walsh,
I'm Joe Abraham.
and you're listening to.
Looking for the
And
evidence.
this show is sponsored by Alive in Christ. We're a church on Badger Road in Kennewick. So if you're interested in coming, we'd love to have you. 10 o'clock on Sundays. If you're listening to this show consistently, you might actually like me, so you might like my services. But hey, we'd love to invite you to church. But anyways, today's topic is, I don't know, probably at the end times. What I hear a lot from people talking about, there's a revival coming. There's a revival coming, and there, I don't know. There just is that really what's going to happen? And in today's time, is America or the Western world, anyways? Because really, it seems like we think the entire world revolves around America, which is like 10% of the population, if that. 300 million, and then there's 7 billion people in the world, so it's not even 10% actually, huh? So for some reason in America, we think that we are the New Jerusalem, I guess, or something. I don't know what's going on, but I guess the question is there going to be a revival at the end, and is that accurate? So
Yeah, and
that's the question.
one of the things I'm curious about is the role of Israel in this whole ordeal, I guess. Because Israel, the unification of Israel as a nation, or the formation of Israel as a nation, is seen as a marker. The temple being reconstructed is definitely
Yeah, that's definitely going to be a marker.
Yeah, it's definitely a marker.
They haven't started yet, have they?
They have been. So I know. Last I knew, when Netanyahu he's not running anymore. He finished it. They split the terms and they did like a half. So both governments came to power because they had like a joint vote, and so they split the time frame and they were going to rule. And Netanyahu did the first half, and then the second person is doing his half. So anyway, one of the campaign things that Netanyahu did was he said he was going to work on getting the temple built.
Right.
And that was one of the campaign promises. And I'm sure they're close. They're close to that becoming a reality.
I've read stuff and I've seen reports about the temple coming, right? And there's some even on the Temple Mount now with the mosque being up there. There's some. I just saw this probably 2 weeks ago. I don't remember all the details, but there's something going on there with that as well. Okay, so I believe that they're allowing the Israelites, the Jews, to go up there and starting to worship, and the Muslims are not wanting the Jews to be up there on the grounds. Right? They're not going in the building, I don't believe. But anyways, there's something going on. But one of the things that people this great awakening, I guess you would say, comes about, where there's going to be a revival in the end times. They're pulling that out of Revelations chapter 6, right? And in the end times, that God's Spirit will be poured out on everybody, and it talks about that in the scriptures. And there's going to be a revival, a massive revival in the end times. And it's also in Revelations chapter 20 as well. So those are some of the things. And then of course God's Spirit being poured out upon all the land, and your sons will prophesy and all that stuff. That's where they're pulling that from, is the revival at the end times. But is that really consistent and accurate with what the Bible says? Two, is that consistent and accurate where we're moving into the end times? So that's the big question.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, another one is the one world government, or the world unifying into one world order. And I mean, there's more
here's
evidence to that.
Here's the question, because I feel like the question is there going to be a revival? Is there a revival now, right? That's the question. But you're giving signs of the end times. So we'll go ahead and talk about signs of the end times right now, and I'm fine with that. Okay, so what are some of the signs that you see that could lead to us moving into the tribulation period?
Yeah, so there's, the reason I was talking about the signs is, do we want to determine, I mean, throughout history you can see how people are always thinking we're at the end. it's always been this perpetual thought that we're at the end. I mean, it's not going to be long from now. It wasn't like, oh, we got 500 more years or whatnot.
Right. Everybody is
Everybody from
yeah.
Peter on was like, Jesus is coming back next year.
Right.
You know, it's imminent. It's going to be now, and you can see that in the first century church very well. I mean, they were selling everything off. They were, they were prepared. They were ready to go.
Right.
And over time, and we've followed that. And so my question now is, after a few end time timelines and them failing, we've now come to the question, when is the end time? And so we use the signs as to determine, are we in the end times, or are we just in the phase between the end time and just some transitory
Right.
period?
Is this normal action throughout history of Christians
Yeah.
thinking that the end times is right around the corner?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes,
So
exactly.
what you're wanting to point out right now, and I'm fine going down this road right now. I do eventually want to answer the
Yeah.
other question, but what you're saying is here's some signs.
No, I want to come back to why I was saying this. It's not about the signs. My question is, if we know when it is, then the signs and the question of the revival, the big revival before the end times, becomes a little bit more accurate to determine.
Okay, the signs, I think the biggest sign that I can see is Jerusalem becoming a country again. Okay, and the gathering of God's people once again. Right?
Yes.
Those are some big signs. I think the temple being built is going to be another sign that's like, okay, because right now I can see, because there's been always rumors of wars and wars. There's been immorality. There've been, I'm the most important person, right?
Yeah.
There's all these things have been, but there's a few things about culturally in the world today that is exclusive to our time, okay? Israel becoming a country again.
Yes.
That's almost 2,000 years, okay?
Yeah.
Of it not being a country. The Jerusalem becoming, the capital of the Six-Day War. President Trump making it the capital, right? Us being able to be in like in the days of Noah, right? Today, I mean, and it might not be today, but I would say in 15 years, the way our kids are being indoctrinated in the schools, despite the efforts of parents, yeah, when we can say that, oh yeah, but it's the majority of people, because the majority of people right now, the ones that I hear the loudest voices of, are saying transgenderness is okay,
Yeah.
homosexuality is okay, having multiple partners is okay, buddies that have sex, right? They call it a certain word. So these are all okay, right? So now that's in our adult world by the majority of people, to include some people that are Christian, right?
Yes.
So now they're sexualizing our kids at a very young age. So in 15, 20 years from today, yeah, I see us being 100% like Sodom and Gomorrah or before the flood. You know? So,
No, yeah, and so there's cultural and other signs that we see that tend to push. So the question of the revival, right? And there's this deep angst in the church for the desire to propagate the gospel,
Right.
and to have this revival, and a lot of people are looking forward to this great revival, and so the question is, my question really is, they say there's going to be a revival coming. And so my question is, okay, what do you think about the stuff? What's happening now? Why is this not considered a great revival? I mean, we have the gospel being preached in pretty much every corner of the world, hundreds of thousands of people getting saved pretty much by the day. Why does this fail to be considered a great revival and yet we are waiting for a great revival that is going to happen?
well, the one thing is, okay, let's say there's a great revival. Right now, let's say there's a lot of people being saved. But in the reality of things is the people falling away is greater than the ones being saved. We can look at the stats. In 2011, 75% of Americans identified as Christians, right? But in 2021, it's down to 63%, dropped by 12% in 10 years. The Americans who identify as non-affiliated, non-religious, as Gnostic, whatever,
Has grown.
something has grown from 18% to to 29%. You know, so when we look at these things, so the population in itself is growing. So even if you want to say that, well, it's not a falling away, it's a new belief, right? Let's just say that's true. Falling away could be that the 10% of the Christians have died, and the ones that are replacing them are not Christians. Yeah. And then there's more people being birthed than there is dying.
Well, and to that point, and that's very true. And I think empirically, if you look at an average church, the average age within a church in America is in the 50s.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's more old people in church than young people.
Yeah.
And younger couples and their children don't seem to come into church. And so as the baby boomers and Gen X start to die, we're going to see a sharp decline in Christianity globally.
Yeah.
Unless it's replaced by the new generation of people coming in, which I do see some hope there. But then it's not a traditional. It's not the American tradition doesn't dictate Christianity as a norm anymore.
Right.
Or the new tradition is we're open, we're secular, and then if you're a Christian, you're doing that outside of your norm, outside of the cultural norm that's precedent in America right now.
Right.
Being a Christian is not the norm. At least in today's political and social weather or climate, it's not really an American ideal to be Christian. It was 20 years or so. Definitely in the 80s and 90s, I think it was starting to change.
Yeah. No, I mean, for me, I think it was changing before that. Probably in the 60s, actually, when it started to shift. There was the Jesus movement, I think is what they call it in the 60s, but...
The 70s.
Was it the 70s? It might have been. I wasn't a Christian at the time, and I was a little kid, so I don't remember. But I remember that, people talking about the Jesus movement. And I do, people that are in their 70s, when they talk as if the 70s were the glory years for Christianity, right? But I know by the time I started paying attention and hearing more about Christianity in the 80s, I could already see that the majority of the people were not Christians. Okay, so I'm in high school, you had, let's say, 100 people. Out of that 100 people, 80-some% would say they're Christians. But out of that 80%, probably 50 to 60% went to church or mass, right? Catholic church. So now we're down, it's probably, 50-some% or even 65%. But then, this is from my perspective as a non-Christian, I'm going to parties and they're all Christians and they're partying. And I wasn't. And I wasn't even a Christian, So my perspective is your Christianity looks just like the rest of the world. So then we get into the 90s, and then it was starting to move to, because this is the kids, and then it moved into the 90s of now they don't have to say they're Christians. What they say is, well, I believe in Jesus. I believe he's real. But they're not saying they're following him. They're not making effort to go to church. So that was in a 10-year span, right? So I could, so now what we've done, and then from the 90s, I would say that carried over for a bit, probably into the mid-2000s.
Well, these people raised children, and obviously they didn't care that the children knew Jesus or God.
Right, they didn't go to church, And
then my generation came about, the 90s generation, and we're like, we don't need God.
Right, exactly, and that's where we're at right now. And when we read the scriptures, it doesn't talk about a revival. And then when I was talking about and I know I said Revelations because I was talking about two different verses, because in Acts chapter 2, and it talks about God will pour out his Spirit in the end times, right? And the kids will be prophesying and all this stuff. But that is during the tribulation periods, and this is in the end times, right? But prior to all that, when I read the scriptures, there's going to be a great falling away, right? And with that, and that's in, I think, 2 Timothy, right? Thessalonians chapter 2, it talks about the great falling away. So And there's a revival before the rapture, right? Is
Unless
that
the
what it is?
rebellion comes first, so no one be deceived. For this day will not come unless the rebellion comes first,
Right.
which is the following way.
Yep. So yeah, and it does depend on your translation. One is a rebellion, and most of them.
I'm reading the ESV.
Yeah.
If you read the NIV, it's going to be different. I
Yeah.
believe.
So some say fallen away, some say rebellion, but it's either the same way. And really, that when we're looking at the end times, and I really wasn't thinking about this conversation being geared towards the end times, but I think it really starts to point that direction because, now we have a whole generation of 30-something, and lower, right, that are not participating in church. They don't find the need for church. They don't even find the importance of it.
And obviously this isn't the majority of the church, but it is a minority within the church. Is the church is now pivoting to the culture.
Yeah, well, I would say it's more than a minority. I think it's a good amount. I couldn't say it's over 50%, but there is a good amount. And the problem is, just like with this world, we look at, I would say the majority of the American people, not Christians, just the majority of the American people, don't understand the push of how and why is the school system taken on the responsibility to push transgenderness, to push homosexuality, to push critical race theory, to push these things when they're there to teach, right? So I think the majority of the Americans are confused by this, but the voices that we hear are the minority. So I think the voices that we hear in the Christian world is a lower percentage, but they make a bigger sound.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. And what's absurd is we have, I don't know, obviously most people who are listening are definitely conservative, so they probably come knowing about the little documentary that came out, What is a Woman?
Right,
20
yeah.
years ago, you would have asked, that's a crazy thing to ask. Why would
Not
that
even
be a
20 years
question?
ago, honestly, before the pandemic.
Yeah.
People,
Well, 2015, 17, 18, it was kind of, transgenderism was starting to catch up a lot more mainstream
okay, all right.
airtime.
Okay, 7 years ago then, but to me this is relatively
New?
New, and maybe, but that's how it creeped in, what was funny is I remember when and I can't say this to be true, although from my perspective it's true, but I remember when they were looking at homosexuality and legalizing marriage, right? The Christian view is, well, if we do this, then what's next? And the world's view is why would we go down that road? All we're saying is we want equality. And there was plenty of Christians that believe that. Look, if I'm not here to condemn them. That's God's job. And if they want to get married and they love each other, they should be able to love. But you look at...
That's a wrong definition of marriage within
right.
That's
what I'm saying
yeah.
is and for me, I didn't vote for same-sex marriage because the Bible restricts it, right? So but for me sitting back, I thought, you know what, I don't believe that homosexuality is in alignment with God, but if that's their lifestyle and they're not confessing Christians and they leave me alone, I'm not going to worry about it. But so I didn't have the complete view of like this is okay, but I kind of was a little bit more neutral in it. But the thing that kept being spoke of was that if we say yes to this, then it's going to go down to other trails, and next thing you know, there's going to be polygamy accepted, and there's going to be this, which I don't think they were being factual in the sense of this is actually what's going to happen. What they were using was hyperbolic language of saying when this gets approved, then we're going to move down other routes that are going to be unusual. And now I'm looking at it and they're exactly right. Because God looks at his homosexual marriage as being immoral, right? So now that's been approved in our country and in most of the world, and now other immoral acts are now becoming acceptable, right?
Well, and the thing about, and I understand that and there's an emotional reaction and emotions are being played here. What I was trying to say is, with the homosexual couples, they talk about marriage.
Right.
Majority of them don't get married. It's a minority who do get married, and within the minority, female partners are much more likely to get married who were previously in a marriage. They break up and then they get become married, which is the most likely, and male companions are much lower on the statistically to get married. And even if they do, then the image of the two happily married gay couple with two kids, usually boy and a girl, that's the painted picture in a commercial. The numbers are staggeringly low. I mean, it's under 10, what, 5%? I mean, don't quote me on the percentage, but it's a very low, I think it's really low, in the low tens percentage for them to have children that they're raising. And even then, the highest percentage is between, again, female to female companions who brought their children along from their previous marriage to a male companion or partner they had. It's not an adopted child. The adoption, when they actually adopt other kids, because this is the biggest push, they say, oh, they're adopting children, it's a good thing. You're talking few thousands of people adopting few thousands of kids of all the whole entire homosexual population, which is a few, several million. And when you break down the numbers, it's like 2-3% actually ends up adopting, or within the couples who get married, and all of those things. So it's a few thousand people, and even when they're adopted, they have issues when the child is being reared, and then the child is not getting, so the child development is different, and so there's other issues there. And so this whole push of 350 million people to this idea is on a failed experiment.
Well, I agree that there's a lot of things that we're pushing in our society today that is not making a long-term positive impact on us. Okay, it's not the sexualization of our young children, because they're wanting to teach us in elementary school, right? And 100% by the time they get into middle school, there's an epidemic within the schools of identifying as the opposite sex, right? Never before, gender dysphoria is true.
It's been around for a long time.
But it's a very, very, homosexuality historically has been running around, I want to say it was 7%, right? Transgenderness or non-binary, or people that are, that percentage, I want to say was less than 1%, right?
It's jumped though, within
it has
25, yeah.
Yeah, it has now, because the way they're pushing it. And now it's become a major topic within the schools, right? And they're pushing this immorality. So again, now, is that a great awakening? Is that a revival? No, that's a falling away.
Yeah.
Because these kids they're not being taught about God. They're being taught about one, sexuality is just fun. Do it with whoever you want. Two, you can be fluid, and you don't have to be a girl, right? And they even asked somebody on an interview. I can't remember. Might have been Fox, but I don't even think it was Fox. But during the interview, I seen this, and the guy asked, a female, can biological men that identify as a woman, so now they've transitioned into womanhood, can they have menstrual cycles and can they have children? And the females were saying yes. And I'm like, it's like they didn't want to say no. You could tell that they were like, in some of the cases, they're looking at them like, okay, the way I perceived it was they knew the right answer, the true
but they didn't
answer,
want to answer it.
but they didn't want to answer it that way because of the fallout and repercussions that they might end up facing. But there were some that were younger people that believed it to be true, and it's like, my gosh, there's just great confusion. So I don't believe that there's a revival in the end times. I believe that there's a falling away in the end times, and the scriptures talk about it. Paul talks about it, And I think a lot of the times when people are saying, okay, if this is not the end times, then yeah, I think there could be a revival, right? But if this is the end times, as you were stating at the beginning, Jerusalem came into existence, or Israel became in existence, Jerusalem became a capital. Today is one of the few times in history, besides the Tower of Babel and prior to that, where we can communicate with anybody around the world. We can fly to and fro. Knowledge is greatly increasing on a daily basis. We're getting the ability to gather knowledge is exponentially faster than it was. It used to be hundreds of years before we doubled our knowledge. And then it went down, I think, in the early 2000s, every 3 years or 5 years. And with a quantum computer, they're looking at like days we double our knowledge, So that's happening. the morality of people is now moving into where it's just really odd, you know, and not only on the sexual side, but just morality of humanity, of caring for one another.
Yes, yes, morality is on the decline because we've made subjective morality acceptable.
Right.
You know, and so and it's honestly appreciated, and it's viewed as being evolved and being woke.
Right.
You know, and what I find funny is that no, this is what we did a long time ago when we were being Bushmen and tribes. We had subjective standards of our morality within the tribes, and that's what was classified as tribalism. If you were from another tribe, I would treat you differently because just for the fact that you were from another tribe, I
Right.
could rape you and kill you, and that was okay. That was
we're
accepted.
moving into that now.
Yeah, and we're moving into that, and
Right.
people think that's evolved. And it's like just because you forgot history doesn't mean you came up with a new idea.
There you go. Well, they say if you forget the history, you're doomed to repeat it, right? But,
Yeah.
you know, you look at the gangster guys, right? The
Yeah.
guys that are gangbangers, you know, they could live one block away and be fighting each other because they're protecting their block,
Yeah.
you know, if you will. And that's tribal instinct, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yet we are moving into that direction where we are becoming woke,
We're identified
you know?
by our culture or our
Yeah.
group, and if I'm gay or lesbian, or if I'm Christian, or if I'm man, if I'm white or black or brown.
Right.
And all of those identifiers define who I am, not my personality or my individuality.
Right,
has
you're,
no
and you're not
character.
created equal
Yeah.
anymore. You're
Yeah.
not. You're subject to your wokenness, right?
Yeah.
Because I've seen black people called prejudice and against their race and what were the other terms that they use? You know, they're racist. They're
Uncle Tom's.
Uncle Toms. They're all
Sam or Uncle Tom? I can't
yeah,
remember.
something like that. But anyways, they've been because they don't agree with the other side. So
Yes.
I've seen white people call black people racist because they're not. So really, they're not. Racist is just a term that is now evolved into you disagree with me. I'm woke and you're not, and because I'm woke, right? I'm the majority. I'm 60-some% of the population. I'm a white person, right? And you're a non-white person of any other nationality that's not white, right? And you're not in agreement with my wokeness, you're a racist, right? That they just throw that out. So really, it's not about racism. It's about disagreement in the way you view the world should be.
Yeah, yeah. They consider themselves to have superior morality. They have evolved into a superior being who now has better morality.
Right.
And they look at me as a savage person.
Yep.
So they're like, I am trying to civilize you, and you trying to not comply with me. I have to now take harsh measures because I cannot have a conversation with you because you and I are not on the same plane.
Yep, and you know we're coming to the end time, so end time of our radio station. So just like a falling away is going to be from the church, and we see that today, Joseph and I are going to be falling away from this radio show. So thank you for listening. Godspeed.
All right, thank you, and see you next week.
That was probably one of my better endings there.
All right. That was good, actually.
All right, here I'm going to turn mine off so the
Yeah, that's kind of a good one.